This podcast episode is made possible by wowdigital.com, your trusted partner for nonprofit and charity website and design. Are you struggling to make your fundraising emails stand out? Vanessa shares how storytelling can boost donations and build stronger donor relationships. Stay tuned, listen up, and let's transform your email fundraising game. Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. I'm your host, David, and in this episode, we're exploring the power of fundraising by email with Vanessa Chase Lockshin. Vanessa is an expert in nonprofit storytelling and email fundraising. She's the author of The Storytelling Nonprofit and has helped many organizations like Variety BC and BC Women's Health Foundation raise millions through compelling email campaigns. So get ready for these insights that are going to take your email to the next level. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining on today's show.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
My pleasure. Okay, let's just start at the beginning here. Why is email fundraising still a powerful tool for nonprofits?
Yeah, I think email sometimes gets a bad rap. We think about like email spammers. We just think about it being ineffective. I think sometimes people kind of like group it together with like feelings they have about direct mail being ineffective, and it's not. The thing that I would say about email that I always tell people is that it is the best digital direct response channel that you have to get in front of your audience with data that you actually own. Unlike social channels that could constantly change and do constantly change or go by the wayside, you have a lot more power and control and influence over your email list. Ultimately, when you're trying to fundraise money, that is really important.
I completely agree with all of that. Not that long ago, we had TikTok shut down. Everybody in the US, it was like half a day, right? I don't really want to get into the politics of any of that, but to your point, you don't own your TikTok channel. TikTok owns your TikTok channel. If they want to boot you, block you, any of that, it could happen on X, it could happen on Facebook, it could happen on LinkedIn, it could happen on any of these platforms. But with email, you have direct access into people's personal or business inboxes. Somebody is going to see that.
And I wouldn't say it's like a guarantee that somebody's going to see it, right? Because obviously, like we do have competition, and the challenge of email is like getting people to open your emails, right? And obviously, like inbox service providers are kind of changing sometimes how people see emails in there. But overall, once somebody opens that email, that's their sole focus in that moment. It's not like scrolling in a social feed where somebody can like easily get away from that, or they're like seeing other things at the same time. It's just a different environment. And I just find it so much more conducive to fundraising that way.
So in terms of emails, do you have any tips on what makes an email maybe stand out once it's sitting in something inbox, or maybe they're a Google workspace where they've got like a promotions tab and a updates tab and a spam folder and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly say some things about like the individual email itself, but the tip that I'd offer people before you even think about like the one email that you're sending is the thing that's most likely going to influence whether or not people open your email is if they think you're a good sender. Like, are you known for sending emails that people want to read? Like, do people engage with your emails often? Are you sending interesting content? Are you in step with what people are thinking about around the issues that you're working on and reflecting that to them in the content that you're sending regularly? And I think that that's kind of like a bigger, more like philosophical strategy piece around email that not a lot of people think about. They always just think about like the individual email, like we've got to send a newsletter, we've got to send the fundraising email, we've got to send the event invite, like all of those things. But collectively, like when we look at the big picture of an email program, do people want to receive your emails? Like, are they excited to get them? Is the thing that I always start with and think about, because if you're overall sending great content and people love you as a sender, that's gold. It's going to get people to open your emails. But when we talk about like the individual emails themselves, certainly sender name and subject line are two of the biggest influences that we see with like kind of the top of the email funnel. And so sending from names that people are going to recognize is always helpful. Like brand recognition, name recognition of staff are very useful for getting those emails open, but also sending subject lines that are, I always tell people, like, we want to send subject lines that are like just vague enough to be interesting to get people to open them, but not like so far over into like spam territory that people are going to feel like really deceived. Like you just kind of pulled one over on them when they open that email. And that's a fine balance. I think it's part of the art of email sometimes is figuring out like what is that balance in the copy. But, I think about like emails that I got, for instance, like on Giving Tuesday and year end last year. I mean, I got like dozens of emails that said like, it's Giving Tuesday, make your donation today. To me personally, like as a donor, I don't find that particularly compelling. But to me, as a digital fundraiser, I don't find those subject lines very well performing because people know what that's about. Everybody's getting Giving Tuesday emails that day. The subject lines that I've had perform best on Giving Tuesday are always the ones that speak a little bit more to the impact and to the problem and engage donors with what it is you're going to talk about rather than that like top line opportunity that just isn't as motivating to them.
Wow, that was like a huge deluge of information there. So I just want to kind of go back to the first point that you were talking about. Like, are people happy to get your emails? What are some metrics that people could think about tracking to go, okay, yeah, people trust us or they know us or they like us, or obviously you can look at open rates, right? So
Sure, yeah.
anybody that's sending emails, don't do an email merge from like Outlook or something, right? You need a platform that can track emails, and it also gives legal legislations for people to unsubscribe. So let these platforms handle that for you. Okay. All right. So we know what makes a good sender. I'm curious, you mentioned that there are some subject lines that worked really well around Giving Tuesday versus, hey, it's Giving Tuesday, donate to us today, right? Double your impact. Maybe there's some kind of donor matching that you were able to organize for your organization. But do you have any examples of a subject line that would work better?
Yeah, I sure do. Best performing subject line I have sent on Giving Tuesday in the last 4 years was one for Variety BC. And the subject line was Parents Can't Keep Up with These Costs. And we were fundraising for children who had complex and special healthcare needs to offset financial costs that families were having to take on. Things like mobility equipment, speech and language therapy, things like that their kids might need that wasn't covered by traditional insurance. And one of the things that really resonated with the audience was the idea that parents were just really kind of drowning under these like additional costs. And like all the parents wanted to do was take care of their kids and like love their kids and help like have their kids have a great childhood. Like that was something that really struck a chord with people. And so when we were putting together Giving Tuesday email, I really wanted to think about what part of the problem here, part of the impact really connects with donors and how can we talk about that subject. So the subject was parents and the problem, which was costs, and be just a little bit vague about the type of costs we're talking about. So these costs, the word these was kind of like the vague piece of that message. And that subject line to this day, like, has outperformed anything else I've sent in the last couple of years. But I think it really hits that formula of like just vague enough to be interesting, but it tells people what you're going to talk about too. Like, I was going to talk about parents, I was going to talk about costs that they were facing and why they couldn't keep up with them, and really get donors into the problem and the impact that they could be a part of really quite quickly in that email.
I love the idea about that. And now, more than ever before, it's easy to do brainstorming around these type of things. So for anybody listening, if they take that subject line and put into ChatGPT, I want a subject line like this for this email, you'll be able to come up with a couple options there. Yeah,
Mhm.
maybe you need to tweak it a little bit and adjust it a bit, but it can definitely help you with that. One of the other things that I think is also important, the first is, and you talked about it, but not exactly like this, is to know your audience, what drives them, what motivates them, create some kind of empathetic reaction subconsciously that is going to make them go, oh, I need to see what this is about.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say it always has to be empathetic. Like sometimes this is about just knowing like the emotional kind of like state people are in about something, whatever that might be. Like, is it anger? Is it surprise? Are people feeling kind of like self-righteous about something? Are they feeling like sad about something? So sometimes it's just about capturing what is the collective emotional response that people are having in a moment. I think that that's part of the magic in copywriting sometimes is being able to touch on that and figure out what that is. But it's hard and it takes time and it takes practice with an email list and a donor file to figure out like what that point is and how you can reflect that back to them.
One of the things that I see a lot of organizations struggling with is even just doing some A/B testing with some email, figuring out, all right, what does this resonate more? Does this resonate more? Right. One of the things that I like to recommend is you have a list of, let's say, 200 people, maybe it's 2,000 people, whatever it happens to be. Send out an A/B test to 10% with this one, 10% with this one, whichever one gets whatever the goal is. Maybe it's click throughs from the email, maybe it's open rate, whatever it happens to be, and then send out whichever the winner is to the rest of the list, and then see how that progresses over time.
Yeah, I think there's such value in A/B testing, but there's also real value in having like a dashboard of your metrics over time too. And like not in the email tools themselves, like, whether you use like MailChimp or Blackbaud's email tools or something else, you can see at a glance all those metrics, but having things in a spreadsheet is so much nicer. You can really like see things a little bit more comprehensively. And I find that when you benchmark yourself over time too, you can start to see like what is actually working, where were like the things that really hit well with people, like whether it was subject lines, call to action within the body of the email where you got like an above average click through rate. All of those things are just are really helpful data points. But I think this is something that I see a lot of like my clients struggle with. And especially I would say like smaller shops where email is something that they're doing, but it's not like one person owns digital or owns email and that's like all they're thinking about. It's easy to collect metrics in a spreadsheet. It's easy to like look at data, at glance, in your email tool. I think there's less of a practice of asking questions about that data. It's saying like, what does this tell me? Like, what does this tell me in comparison to what else I'm seeing? What does this say about the email that I sent? What are the trend lines we're seeing? And I think like having some sort of built-in practice around asking questions, the data fundamentally just makes it so much more useful and like you can become a much more effective email fundraiser.
One of the things we did with our list is we did A/B testing with day of week, right? And then once we found out kind of like which one got the most opens, then we started A/B testing with time of day on that day. And then we waited a good period, like about 8, 9 months. And then we started testing time of day on different days as well. And then we locked in, all right, this is the best day, this is the best time where we get the most open rates. And yeah, part of that could be because of subject line, but we were staying consistent with that. So we had like the scientific methodology applied to this thing. So I think it's possible, even if you don't have a lot of money, to do some testing like that. Maybe send out a monthly email or a quarterly email. Is the start of the quarter better than end of the quarter? I would say as a nonprofit, start of the quarter would probably be a little bit better in my gut reaction, because like end of quarter, then you deal with like end of year, and then you deal with like Giving Tuesday, end of year giving for like tax receipts and all that kind of stuff.
I feel like I don't see a huge variance usually in the lists that I work on. I will say like there's been a few things that have surprised me. Evening sends tend to do well for some of my fundraising emails. Like we'll send at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. local time. You would think that that's like a terrible time of day to send an email, but people are home. They're like not doing much. They're on their phones, they're watching TV. So I often just try to think about like the consumer, like the end person who's going to get this email. Is this a time of day where they might not be doing much? Like I also find Saturday, Sunday morning email sends can be pretty good as well. Again, people are at home, they're having their coffee, like they're reading stuff on their phone. Like it's a great time for us to just like meet them where they're at. But I always tell people that Giving Tuesday is an email send day. It's a fine day to send an email. Like every other day of the year is a good day to send an email. It's a competitive day. And I always tell people that like it's a bloodbath. There's a lot of fundraising emails and the high competition is not going to do you any favors. I, over the last 2 years, 3 years maybe, with several of our clients, have tested sending other emails that week. And specifically that Friday after Giving Tuesday tends to be our best performing email day of that week, which again, like I remember when I first thought about sending emails that day a couple of years ago, I was like, I don't know, like maybe it'll work. We were just trying to meet the campaign goal because it hadn't fully like got up to where we wanted it to on Tuesday. And then we sent the Friday email and just like totally obliterated the goal that they had for it. And so I repeated that test a few times over the last couple of years with people, but 3 days later, 4 days later on Thursday, Friday, nobody is sending emails. Like that is a great time to stand out and just sort of like capitalize on the silence in people's inboxes that week.
Love that idea.
Now you all know my secret.
We won't tell anybody. Don't worry, Vanessa. It's okay. So I'm curious about your take on like beautifully, amazingly designed emails, long form versus short form, plain text kind of style emails. What do you see as things that work better?
I think it really depends on the lists in a lot of ways and what people are used to and what they expect from the sender. Like I definitely worked with organizations who send very image heavy emails, which beautifully designed. It reflects like the level at which they operate and manage the brand, and that works for them. When I worked with Variety BC on building their email program a couple years ago, we raised $1.2 million in about 15 months on that email list, sending largely pretty plain looking emails. They were really story based emails where we focused on quality copy and engaging people with the message that we had to say. And that worked very well. The thing that I would say about length of email, I often see like trip people up a little bit, is that the length doesn't necessarily matter in some ways. It matters that you've made a sufficient case for giving and you've gotten across the theory of change for giving. Like if you haven't been able to compellingly tell people why donating is going to make a difference, how that's going to make a difference, it doesn't matter if the email is short or long. And I think in some ways, for a lot of people, if you try to write a short email, you feel the pressure of like less word real estate and you feel like you don't have as much time to like say what you need to say. And that can be difficult. The structure I typically use in emails that I write, like fundraising emails anyways, I often write like a 2 ask structure email where I do about like 150 words like opener, and then there's a call to action, and then there's a second ask, and that second ask will be like another 100 to 120 words or so with like a story or some sort of like extrapolation on the first part of the email. It's like I always tell people like that second part of the email is like to convince the unconvinced. Like if somebody's still reading, like they care enough, hopefully I can get them a good reason to donate by the end of that part. And then making that second call to action. And I find both having more than one donate button increases the odds that people are going to click on things, but also it just gives people enough information. I think there's a lot of donors who like want to understand the context in which you're asking. They have questions and like our email copy needs to answer that for them.
Absolutely. So beyond, I guess, fundraising, a lot of nonprofits, they absolutely need fundraising. There's government cuts to charities. North America kind of happening, not happening. Yes, no, who knows? It's important to connect with your audience. And you've kind of like woven this thread through everything you've said, which is really that you need to know the audience. What are they going to care about? How will your message fit with them? When is a good time to send to them? What is going to fit into their life at that moment? That type of thing to help kind of get the message across. But aside from fundraising, how can email support digital marketing goals?
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about email. Like, it's such a flexible tool to help organizations with other goals that they have, whether it's registering people in programs, like getting people to a place on your website, signing petitions. Like, there's lots of ways that you can use it. I think the thing to think about with your email list is what are your goals for the list? Like, who is on this email list? Like, I work on a lot of lists that are 80 to 95% donors. So I know people who are on here are people who want to donate, have donated. That's their relationship with the organization. I've also worked on a lot of lists where are not donors. Like, they are engaged with the organization in some other capacity, maybe from signing petitions, going to events, things like that. And part of the goal of email is like converting those people into donors. And that's some of what has to happen there. So I think you just have to kind of step back and think about like what are your goals for your email list? How do you want it to help support your digital marketing goals? And then think about like how does that match up with like who's currently on your list? Like do you have the existing audience to make that happen? Do you need to grow the audience in new ways or do you need to convert your current audience going from non-donors to donors? That sort of thing. You know, I would say like in some ways like nothing is impossible with email. You just have to think about like what are the goals and who's there and how can they start to like bring those pieces together a little bit.
Just a little bit further to that, for everybody listening, you need a digital marketing strategy, and email needs to be part of that. And perhaps having a separate strategy around email instead of having it kind of like all lumped in together, but getting clear direction and knowing, all right, this is the purpose of who we're sending to when we segment the list this way. And here's if we segment this way. And I think it's important to make sure that you're tagging the people that are in your list so that you can target them. That sounds really harsh, right? But really, that's what we're doing, right? We're targeting these people with this type of message because XYZ, and the outcome we want is this, right? And I think that that would really help move you forward in terms of creating positive change in why you're emailing, when you're emailing, and what you're emailing.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. And I think in some ways, like your ability to reach your goals with email and with digital marketing, you know, is only as good as like the data is. You know, if your goal is to fundraise, like if you don't have a lot of data mapped to your subscribers about what is their giving history, what sort of segment do they fall into, it's going to be harder to make the right kind of ask. You know, I think about like some of the low hanging fruit that my clients have seen over the years from segmentation. And one of the biggest groups is mid level giving. I regularly send emails where there's a $1,000 to $5,000 ask in the email itself that then goes and asks people to make that donation. Those emails convert really well for me and generally are a really big part of those organizations' digital fundraising programs because it's a big group of donors who often donate quite a bit of money. But if I didn't have that data mapped to subscribers to know like who are these people and how can I reach them? How do I want to talk to them and what sort of asks do I want to put it in front of them? Probably be leaving a lot of money on the table. You know, like those people might go to a landing page where the gift array is like $25 to like maybe 500 and maybe they would put in another option of like $1,000, but maybe they wouldn't. Who knows? So being able to have that kind of data just make you that much more effective.
For maybe a smaller nonprofit or a startup nonprofit or something that is a little bit more limited financially in what they can afford to spend on email or digital marketing side of stuff. Do you have any practical ways that they can start with email if they haven't already?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I always tell people is to figure out like how to be consistent with sending emails. Part of like what works well with emails is just being a consistent sender so that people get used to receiving your emails and have that relationship with you as a sender. You do not need to send every day. You don't even need to send every week. But figuring out like a frequency schedule that's going to work for you, your organization's capacity, like whatever stage you're at, start there and like kind of maintain that schedule for a while. I think a lot of organizations tend to be really conservative with email and undersend as opposed to oversend. Like they kind of overcorrect for like being like, oh, like we don't want to spam people, so we should send any emails. We should send like one email a quarter. And I always tell people the problem with just sending like one email every 90 days is that inevitably you're going to get people who signed up and then the first email they get is like a month or two later and they're going to forget that they signed up, they unsubscribed. Or there's going to be people who've been on there a while who are to feel like I'm not getting a lot out of this email and they'll unsubscribe. So thinking about like how can we work up to sending a little bit more frequently, at least once a month, like always a good place to start from. And then I would say the other thing that's really helpful in just getting started with email is kind of the practice around thinking about email as more than just like your e-newsletter or your newsletter. Like email is like so much more than that. And thinking just a little bit more bigger picture about like what can email do? How can email complement programmatic work we're doing, fundraising work we're doing, other communications work we're doing, and building kind of some of those goals into your emails. So, using email to market your programs that maybe you're trying to fill as a startup nonprofit, or using email to drive traffic someplace on your website or to another digital channel to engage your audience. But those are all really great things you can do with email that don't cost a lot of money and can help you as a smaller nonprofit just start to get like more of that digital ecosystem in place.
Awesome. Vanessa, your insights on email fundraising, very valuable. So many little like gold nugget, a little bit of your secret sauce in there for everybody listening as well. Your focus on using storytelling to help donor engagement. So if anybody does want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, you can find me over at my website, thestorytellingnonprofit.com. My email is Vanessa at the Storytelling Nonprofit if you want to get in touch with me directly. And then if you're looking for some additional resources around email, I have some free tools that you can download, including an email fundraising campaign toolkit. And inside that, I have a brief to help you actually think through the different parts of your email campaign and what goes into it. And then I also have in there a spreadsheet, which is an email calendar and performance tracker, which is the same one I use with our agency clients to track and manage emails. If you would like either of those things, you can go download that over at the storytellingnonprofit.com/toolkit. They're both free.
Amazing. Thank you again so much, Vanessa, for joining me on the show here. It's been a pleasure learning some of these things from you. I'm going to deploy them in my agency as well as talk to some of our clients about this. And yeah, thanks for coming on the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. To everybody listening, if you're interested in the link to Vanessa's website, the toolkit, her email address, and any of the resources and things that we've talked about on the show, just head over to our podcast page at nonprofitdigitalsuccess.com. Click on this episode for all the details as well. If you could take a moment and give us a little rating, that would help us out a lot with promoting the podcast out there. So until next time, keep on being successful.